And with that, I see that our past editor is over here, Dr. Nemcek, who's rushed in from his own paper and is going to talk to us about how to get your papers published. Welcome, Al.
Thanks. I hope you'll excuse me not wearing my suit coat, but it was warm running down here from the other room. Okay, how to get your paper published. I'm sure many of you are interested in this. The most important criteria, and the criteria that I'm not going to talk about, are things that, you know, are part of your training and your mentorship and so on. And these are the importance of the study or report to the existing body of knowledge and the scientific merit of the study. And there was a real nice article, I recommend this to you, by Bordage in Academic Medicine in 2001. And that article talked about the reasons that manuscripts get rejected. They looked at quite a large number of manuscripts, and the ones that were rejected had a number of reasons, many based on the scientific validity, things like inappropriate or incomplete results. Overinterpretation of results is a very common one. You know, you claim that something is safe and effective on the basis of 5 cases, claims that aren't warranted by the data. Inappropriate or a suboptimal instrumentation, and by instrumentation, the methods of testing and data collection. The sample is too small or it's biased. Text is difficult to follow. There's an insufficient statement of the problem that you're trying to address. So, I mean, if you're going to be considering writing a paper or considering a project, think about what the problem is that you're trying to answer. Inaccurate or inconsistent data, inaccurate or outdated review of the literature. The literature should be timely and appropriate. Insufficient data presented, and defective tables or figures. Now, we're not going to go into detail about any of these. I do want to say that assuming that you do have a good study, there's a number of things that you can do to help improve the likelihood of acceptance, at least. And again, these reflect my bias. Ziv may have something different to say about this as the current editor, but I can tell you the sorts of things that, improve the likelihood of acceptance. And some of these are really easy to implement, but even more remarkably are ignored very commonly by authors. So tip 1, highlight the importance of the manuscript, okay? Each acceptable study or report should add to the literature. Think about how it does that. And don't make the reviewer or the reader guess this. Have something important to say and tell the reviewer or reader what you're saying. Okay, how do you do that? Well, in the introduction and the focus on the background that led to this study or this report, and finish it with a statement of purpose, ideally in the setting of a study, ideally with a hypothesis that drives the study. Focus the discussion on an explanation of why the conclusions and the purpose served by this manuscript are valuable to the literature. Put it in the context of pre-existing literature. Does it corroborate existing literature? And many times those are important studies. Does it refute the existing literature? And if so, how or perhaps why does it refute the existing literature? This is sort of a pet peeve of mine. Avoid direct statements of primacy. This is the first report of, or this has not been previously described. Look, statements of primacy are difficult to sustain. I can't tell you the number of times that this claim was made when a little bit of research suggested that this indeed was not the first time that this was described. They add little to the manuscript that's otherwise deemed worthy of publication, and they sometimes really border on the absurd. Right? This is the first description of transcatheter preoperative embolization of a left patellar angiosarcoma in a 41-year-old commercial fisherman. Well, they did have one on the right side last year, but this is the first one on the left side. So primacy speaks for itself. You don't need to say that, and the reviewers and the editor should recognize that. Avoid statements of purpose that simply reiterate what you're describing, okay? Here's the purpose. We describe our experience with the X-rated stent. Not X-rated, X-rated. Okay? Add a statement that describes why the reader should care. Who cares? Why should you care about the experience with the X-rated stent? Okay? And I didn't know where else to put this, but it's also very important in an intellectually honest paper because almost every study has limitations. You, as a thoughtful writer, should recognize those limitations and state them clearly when you submit this paper. All right, follow directions, right? We learned this in kindergarten. Every scientific journal has very clearly articulated instructions to author. authors. Those describe the types of articles that the journal considers, the format for those articles, and the content requirements for the individual sections. And you should, this is a talk in itself, you should understand the structure of a scientific article because they're all basically similar in terms of the sections that are required. Okay, JVIR, you look on the website, you see the Instructions for Authors tab. Okay, and then in this it tells you the types of articles and the distinct format which are appropriate for those articles. It tells you even down to the preferred word processing program and so on. So follow those directions. It's not that hard to do, and it's very easy to find these directions. It also frequently provides additional suggestions that enhance the value and the desirability of the submitted manuscript. And one of the really important ones for our specialty is that JVIR lists and gives access to published reporting standards that, if relevant to the paper, should be followed. And this really goes back to before you write the paper. If you're planning a study, it's important not just for getting the paper published, but for the quality of our literature to make sure that we're comparing apples and apples when we, when we compare the results of various studies. So, and this again is on the website for JVIR. In order to ensure consistency in reporting the results of clinical research, we've developed a number of reporting standards that authors should follow when submitting manuscripts. They're very easy to find. They're in the Collections tab under Reporting Standards, as you can see there. I don't know where my pointer is here, but, well, whatever. You can see it. There we have one. If you're going to do a tips article, there's one nicely authored by our previous speakers, Eve Haskell, and very easy to pull up, and those are the types of standards that you should follow when you write that paper. Now, this would seem to be just common sense, make the manuscript as readable as possible. Look, reviewers and readers are only human, and when you have lots of errors in grammar, syntax, and spelling, they're at the very least frustrating and distracting to the reviewer. And in extreme cases, when there are a lot of such errors, they can confuse the message of the paper. You're not communicating what you're trying to communicate. And then reviewers may assume rightly or wrongly, and frequently rightly, that those errors are reflective not only of the writing of the manuscript, but the way the study was performed. All right, this is another one of my pet peeves. Abbreviations should be explained at the first call out in the text. Avoid unconventional abbreviations. They should, abbreviations, what do? They place the burden of remembering WTSF on the reader, okay, which stands for what they stand for. And they can be extremely irritating to the reader and reviewer. Look, with modern word pressing, there's no need, there's only two reasons to use abbreviations. One is it's such common parlance that we all say it, CT, MR, that sort of thing. Or to put it into tables to save room, but not in the bulk of the manuscript itself. Now, this problem is particularly relevant for authors for whom English is not their native tongue. Very understandable problem. But a good suggestion is to have a colleague fluent in English manuscript preparation review the manuscript prior to submission. And actually, there are several things on the website that are even little videos that will help you in this regard. Tip 4, carefully consider suggestions by reviewers as ways to improve the manuscript. Look, oftentimes authors will respond to reviewers in an argumentative fashion, as if the reviewer were personally attacking them. Now, sometimes they are attacking them, but that's the job of the editor. That's Zeev's job at this point to not let that occur. But, things like, what in the world does this reviewer want? Look, be respectful of reviewers. They're not always right. I will fully admit that. And they may be mistaken in some of their suggestions, but most are trying very hard to help the authors recognize weaknesses in the study and its presentation. So think about those suggestions. Respond in a calm, thoughtful fashion, even if you disagree with the suggestion, and that sometimes is appropriate. Be succinct. Okay, short articles that stick to the point are really easier to read and get their message across far better than rambling tomes, okay? It's reasonably easy to add material if an editor or reviewer believes more detail is necessary. Trimming the fat is a little bit harder, I think at least. And delete material that's extremely familiar to journal readers, such as an explanation of the Selinger technique, unless there's something special about that technique that you want to emphasize with your study. Know the audience for the journal to which you're submitting your manuscript. Send your paper to the right place. A superbly written article may not be accepted to a particular journal if the subject matter fails to reflect the practice patterns and concerns and interests of the majority of the readers. Okay, and it's a little tough in the case of interventional radiology, I'll fully admit, because we do so many different things. But, I mean, really, an article on treating coronary artery disease with drug-eluting stents, at least in this year, would in general be better sent to a journal on coronary interventions than to JVIR. So in summary, how do you get your paper published? Well, timely, relevant, evidence-based scientific studies that are well-designed, well-written, and scientifically honest. And that goes beyond validity. That goes to recognizing the limitations of your paper. Highlight the importance of your study, follow directions, make the manuscripts clear, logical, and easy to read. Be willing to accept a reviewer's suggestions as ways to improve the manuscript. Be succinct, be pithy in your writing, and know the audience to whom you're writing. Thank you very much.